picking up to we're all talking about the value of an archive and what's the business value of an archive, and can we sell it as a return on investment idea. And what we've come across is that it really depends on what is the dynamic within the company. Are they primarily using their heritage or their history to promote internal cultural awareness or remind people of what the company DNA is, all those expressions? Then you end up talking to the head of HR or internal communications. If they're more into a sort of a sales perspective, or maybe they have a product that is very heavily into competition with other similar products in the market, then you build on being around for a long time. I'm looking at all the liquors of the world, or wine, etc. So it depends on the business dynamic, but I think there is a business case for every company. You just have to figure out what is the angle for your company, and then you have to start selling it. And it's interesting to watch corporate heritage management sort of emerge as actually a field that is, of course, building an archive practice and what have you, but also picking up a little bit of storytelling, picking up a little bit of corporate communication in general. In Italy, there's a wonderful new organization where it's called the Associazione Italiana of Corporate Heritage Managers, the Italian Association for Corporate Heritage Managers, a bunch of Italian archivists and corporate storytellers who get together every now and then and share best practices. It just started about a year ago. So very similar to this CoLab idea, but for Italy.
Interesting. I'm curious, who are your most, I guess, strongest allies internally in your role?
Head of Corpcom, corporate communications, and head of HR. Sometimes head of legal, depending on if it's territorial disputes or IP disputes that Robert mentioned. Much less so head of marketing, which is where we'd like to break into much more. We think there's a marketing case to use your history. I mean, the fact that you've been around for a long time is a selling point in whatever you're selling today. It's
Interesting. Helen, who are your biggest allies internally?
Well, I was going to say it's interesting that before we came our own autonomous team under the archive team, it was one person who was lodged within the comms team. That was the kind of previous iteration. And a lot of his role was kind of drumming up internal enthusiasm. So it was picking this day in history picture from the photo archive, for instance. And, we're in a really exciting place now that we're our own autonomous team, but I still want to keep those relationships with comms going because anniversaries are really interesting, both internally and externally. And I think a lot of our role as archivists within a larger company is kind of being our own marketing. Basically, we're telling our own stories. We're getting our colleagues interested in what's going on. And Casper, you mentioned earlier the cameraman hanging out of the of the helicopter in his little shorts, which I feel are far too short for the kind of dangerous work he was doing. But that clip went down so well internally because it's actually before Reuters had a kind of TV branch. It was previously Viz News. And that's from the Viz News corporate archive to advertise their coverage of the Gulf War. And we digitized that bit of the corporate archive, and we found that people were super, super interested in it. It really captured people's imagination, actually, particularly in my colleagues in editorial, kind of their predecessors, what they were doing to capture the news 30, 40 years ago, people are super interested in. And so, yeah, Laura, to answer your question, I think our biggest allies are comms and marketing because it's those people that are telling stories, and the archive is, that's what an archive is. It's full of stories.
I love that. What about you, Robert, and also Adrian? Who are your biggest internal allies? And Jill, for that matter.
I think for me, so it was interesting, Helen, you saying there about being your own allies in some respects, and really pushing out the stories from internal. I think for us, particularly, that's going to be a big part because we've only just started doing the archives in Twinings and Oval teams. So it's going to be really interesting to see who really pushes it. And once we can show a lot of the stuff that's in there, people will start to naturally look for it, I think. But generally, yes, I'm in the marketing team. So actually, the global marketing team, so that helps to push it out in that respect, with behind it. But also, interestingly, the CEO who joined the organisation a few years ago, he appreciates the value of the heritage that the organisations have. So actually, he understands how important it is for us to keep this alive and preserve it all as well. And this preservation thing in particular, I think, is really important for everybody.
And I would just say, going what I was saying before was the marketing sort of side of things is probably they're probably going to be my biggest supporters. I think it's also I think maybe it's not something specific to just whiskey archivists, but I've found by the nature of whiskey, it's a product that has to be a certain age before it can be called whiskey. So there is this inherent appreciation of history and archives and how they can help with the promotional side of things. But also, like I was saying, this recent event that I did, using archives directly to engage, I think, different audiences or even existing traditional whiskey drinking audiences, telling them something new, telling them, those stories from the archives, like say, Helen, just to make them realize that there's always something new for them to discover, but also it sort of just builds on the understanding of history that they already have for those particular brands and that particular product. So, but yeah, marketing I would definitely say is where I get most support from, I guess.
Yeah, and I want to hear from Jill. I just a quick observation. It feels to me like you know basically there's innovation over time that is reflected in the collections and the archives, right? And so I know, we wanted to talk a little bit about innovation. Where I think we're almost out of time, but it just, occurred to me that really when you're telling the stories that we're talking about here, you're showing innovation over the ages, over the time, right? And the history of the company. And I just think that's so powerful because, it just continues. So Jill, who's your greatest ally within GSK?
So picking up on something Adrian just said, over the past, I guess, 5 years now, I've done 3 different bits of research for the chairman of our board. So the first 2 were he must go to a lot of events and he meets people and he says, I'm the chairman of GSK. And then they tell him his stories. So we've done some research for these people that he's met. But just this past weekend, he hosted an event in our global headquarters about antimicrobial resistance. We've been making antibiotics for 70 years. So one of the things that he told the team to include was our history of this 80-year period of where we started in antibiotics and coming all the way up through to today, where just earlier this year we had a brand new antibiotic approval that is now available for use in patients with uncomplicated urinary tract infections. So we have that from the very beginning. We have all these panels. They're up on our 8th floor at the moment, telling you where we started with penicillin, all these kind of bedpan flasks, right the way through to the massive mass production and trying to make sure that we're not overusing antibiotics today.